United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, call the roll.
Trustee Spurling. Here. Trustee Lee.
Yes.
Trustee Heinz. Trustee Youngerman.
Here.
And Trustee Marisak.
Yes. And we do have a quorum this evening. Move on to public participation. This is a 2-minute opportunity. Any member of the public to address the board? If there are any comments from the public, now would be the opportunity. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to the second item, recognition of Officer Bob Coletta. Turn it over to the Chief.
This one work? Green light.
No, it's working.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight we get to do one of those things that's nice for the police department. Unfortunately, it's been an extremely busy afternoon. We had to pull Bob off the street while the rest of his squad is out working. Something good happens, and so we like to show our appreciation for our employees who do something great. So Bob Coletta has been with the PD, for a long time, one of our oldest veterans. Day shift guy, loves it because not much crazy stuff happens on day shift. And this time, Bob was there, performed exceptionally well under a stressful instance. I'm going to read you a citation. It's for a life-saving award. So this life-saving award is awarded to Officer Robert T. Coletta for your actions on January 19th, 2019, while performing duties as a police officer in the village of Montgomery. Officer Coletta responded to an individual in medical distress, and upon arrival at the scene, Officer Coletta observed an adult male unconscious, not breathing, in the need of emergency medical aid. Officer Coletta quickly identified the symptoms the individual was exhibiting, administers life-saving measures by performing CPR. Officer Coletta's expertise, training, and decisive actions were well beyond the average police response. In addition, if not for his action, it would have been likely that the individual may not have survived. He's a credit to himself, the Montgomery Police Department, and the citizens of Montgomery. Given our hand, today's date, signed by Chief of Police. Thank you, sir.
It's awesome. Thank you. All right, we'll move on. Consent agenda. I'll read the items and entertain a motion for approval. I have minutes of the village board meeting of January 28th, accounts payable through February 21st, Ordinance 1842. This is the first of all these building codes. 1843, Ordinance 1844, 1845, 1846, 47, and 48. These are all second reading. We discussed these at the last meeting, and I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee.
Yes.
And Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
That carries 4-0. Thank you. Under items for separate action, we have Ordinance 1840, granting a special use for outdoor storage. This is Lumberman's Wholesale, Inc. Second reading. We talked about this at the last meeting, and I'll ask staff for an update.
Thank you. As you heard last time, this was a recommendation from staff and Plan Commission for approval of outside storage for Lumberman's at 1717 Industrial Drive. This is a lease of this property by Lumberman's. Their operation is located across the street. So they have a lease, I believe it's a 10-year lease for this property to utilize obviously the building, but also they wish to utilize some of the outdoor parking space that's not being utilized now with the building for an outside storage facility. They would fence the property to be used as storage with a black vinyl fence with privacy slats, maximum of 6 feet high, no barbed wire. Additional landscaping would be added in front of the fence, between the fence and the street right-of-way. And the fence would meet the proper zoning setbacks. And as you mentioned, this is second reading, so there would be hopefully approval of this item tonight,
All right.
or action on this item tonight.
Yep. Is there any questions for staff? I know
Yes.
the petitioner is here. If you have anything to add, you're welcome to address the board.
I would, excuse me, Mr.
yeah.
President, I would like to also add that in your weekly notes, you had a letter from an adjacent property owner who was opposed to this proposed use. He was unable to attend the Plan Commission meeting and the public hearing as he was out of town.
Thank you.
I have a question for Director Young. The fence will be 6 feet in height. The material stored cannot be over the height of the fence. Is that correct?
I'd ask the applicant to reply to that. The discussion that we had did not include anything in terms of the overall height of the storage, so.
No, it won't be our intent to store, just the nature of the products that we're storing, it's really prohibited to stack them higher than.
Okay, to stack it that high. And just for clarification, Director Young, the opposition that we've received is something that the village cannot necessarily enforce. It's something that is in the covenants.
It is in the covenants. I think I'd like to have Steve respond to that question.
Sure, thank you.
Sure. So covenants are privately enforceable restrictions on land. They're not enforced by the village. In other words, it's a contract between landowners, presumably the area landowners there at some point decided they'd put together these covenants and restrictions, and they're perfectly entitled to. But any prescriptions in there, any prohibitions in there are purely up to them. So when the village looks at whether or not you should grant a special use, you're not looking towards those. You are looking instead towards, does it meet the standards for a special use under your ordinances? If it does, you should grant it. If it doesn't, you should not. Now, of course, we always urge petitioners to do their due diligence to make sure they're not doing all this work at the village only to discover that there's a private prohibition, but truly that is up to them to determine, and also up to any landowner who's in that to enforce it if they felt appropriate. But for us, the idea is that the village determines it through its own ordinances. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, thank you.
I do believe too, I read through the covenants after I received them just a few weeks ago. And I don't see anything in there which will be violation of. I think it stems from some other things outside of the covenants that I think that just happened to come up. But we certainly wouldn't be pursuing this if we thought we were going to be in violation of the covenants.
If I could add one other thing, the fencing would have to come down once they terminated their lease, because the parking area that they would be storing on is intended to be used for parking if the building is occupied by a different user. So they're using it as warehousing,
Okay.
and we would need the parking in the future for a future user, depending on the use, obviously. So the fencing would have to be removed.
And forgive me because I didn't look through this since last time. Is that spelled out? Because typically we talk about the special use running with the property. So that's spelled out in here once the lease is up, that the fencing would have to come down.
We'll make sure that that's included in the signed ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
And it is screen fencing, correct?
Slats.
Okay.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, that is in there. So the special use becomes null and void after 6 months of no special use, right? Generally speaking?
Yes, and the ordinance does provide for that, but I think what the trustee is looking for may be a little bit more explicit, because in theory, this lease could end, this gentleman could be gone, and someone else could come
Right.
in and not abandon that use. So
Could I
if-
suggest
if
that
you
we-
really want to tie it to this lessor, we would need to say that.
Okay.
Could we possibly have a motion to approve subject to attorney review, and then that clause could be added to the ordinance?
Absolutely, as long as we're clear that that's what the board wants.
Sure.
Yes.
For what it's worth, I don't know if this matters, it is in our lease and our landlord's here, that it's our responsibility to take down.
It's good to know, but if the board wants that provision in the ordinance, please make the motion in that way.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Thank you. If there's nothing else, do you want to make a motion?
So just say, subject to attorney review, or?
If you'd make it a motion to approve, subject to attorney review, to add provisions regarding termination of the special use concurrent with the termination of the lease. You could say, so
So
moved.
moved.
All right.
What he said.
Is there a second? There's a second. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee.
Due to that legal ramification, like I said, of the covenants, I'm going to abstain again.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
And Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
That carries 3-0. All right, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, move on to item B. We have Resolution 2019-002, adopting an investment policy. Couldn't find you there for a second? Director of Finance, go ahead.
Thank you, President Brawley. I'm actually going to talk about B and C together here. They go together. So PMA Financial is one of our current brokers. They will be changing where our funds are held before we make an investment and then after maturity. As such, that would require an update to the list of authorized institutions. It's the appendix to our investment policy. So that is what 2019-002 is for, is adopting that new investment policy. Again, the only change is updating the list of authorized institutions. And then Resolution 2019-003, because it is an investment pool, it will require the approval of declaration of trust, any of the pools that we belong to, in order to be a member of that pool and invest in that pool. There's a trust that we have to sign on to as a member of that. And so that's what the second resolution is for, is to authorize staff to do so, sign any documents that are needed, et cetera. So if there's any questions, I can answer those at this time.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Go ahead.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
And Trustee Lee.
Yeah.
That carries 4-0. Item C, that's Resolution 2019-003. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Go ahead.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee.
Yes.
And Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
That carries 4-0. Thank you. Items for discussion this evening, we have the 2019 MFT and Infrastructure Road Program bid results. Engineer Wallers?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to give an update to the board. We did receive bids for our road program on February 19th. We had two bidders. The low bidder is Geneva Construction. They were $82,000 under engineer's estimate. The other bidder was Builders Paving. The bid separation was $4,200 on a $3.4 million bid, so very close bids. We will be requesting award of that contract at our next board meeting. Just wanted to let you know that because we have commingled our MFT funds with our other funds for the road program, we have to adhere to some of the rules that IDOT puts forward, which is a 7-day waiting period, so that's the reason why we're not awarding it tonight, but it doesn't affect our schedule in any way. So again, we'll be looking for approval at the next board meeting. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Move on to fiscal year 2020 general fund budget, which is literally the main reason why I'm sure everybody came tonight. Justin?
Thank you, President Brawley. This is the first meeting that we will be discussing the fiscal year 2020 budget. Tonight, we'll be discussing the general fund, and then we will have 2 additional meetings where we discuss capital and then water. For fiscal year 19, we are currently estimating a surplus of approximately $430,000. For fiscal year 2020, we are currently looking at a net surplus of $87,000. For personnel, there is an additional an additional patrol officer, additional maintenance worker in streets and water. And then I've listed on there some of the larger items in the budget. The one specifically that I did want to mention was liability insurance. We previously included a 14% increase in our rate. We now have learned that it's going to be essentially flat. So we've decreased that $43,000 from what it has been in there previously. Other than that, if there's any questions, myself or any of the other department heads be happy to answer those.
Thank you. And the liability insurance information that you just mentioned, that's reflected in the 2020 net surplus of $87,000?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Justin or staff? I know that everybody had their individual or 2x2 budget meetings to dive deep into the budget, but if you have any questions? Now? or-
Just a comment, I like the way that we did this year with the department heads in the meetings with us. It was able, if we had specific questions, it made things a little easier for us and a little quicker, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, we'll talk about this a lot over the next several weeks, so you can bring questions at that time as well. And the draft budget will be up on the village website by this Friday, I think you'd said?
It will be up on the village website by Friday, yes.
Okay. All righty, thank you. Anything, we'll move on then. Anything new or unfinished?
Just a quick question, any update on Riverbend yet, or no?
Don't have an update at this time.
Thank you.
All right. Hearing none, future meetings, our next meeting is Monday, March 11th at 7 PM in this room, and I think, yeah. And that's it. We'll go, we do not have executive session, so at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes?
And Trustee Lee.
Yes.
We almost
Thank you. We're adjourned.
beat the record, 19 minutes.